Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. My name is Jeremiah Periak, and I'm the Consultation and Engagement Lead for WSP's Environment Team, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. Today, as all of you know, we're going to be discussing the City of Peterborough's Transportation Master Plan and the East Side Transportation Study. My colleague Brett is going to be beginning his presentation soon. First, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. We have a fairly long meeting today, and we've allocated quite a bit of time for Q&A during today's session, so we should be able to get to all of the questions. But if we do run long, we will be able to answer all questions via email or via the project website. And since we do have such a long presentation, we do ask that you please hold questions until the end of both presentations. As a reminder, this presentation is also being recorded and will be posted on the city's project website after. During the Q&A, if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to use the raised hand function, and I'll call on people in the order in which I see your hand raised, and feel free to type your question in the chat box as well. If you're calling in via mobile phone, which I see a few people are, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. We do want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we will be ending at 2 p.m. or sooner. And Brett, I'll let you go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Jeremiah, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have all of you with us. I'm going to go ahead and start off by just acknowledging the presentation contents, how we're going to structure our time today. I'm going to start with a brief overview of the timeline. If you've been with us at our previous public information centers, you might be aware of that, but wanted to update you on that and where we stand. And just to recap the council approved strategy that was approved by your council in November of 2021. Then we're going to get into the meat of the presentation, which is our draft infrastructure recommendations and policy initiatives. Now, this presentation is combining the overall city transportation master plan as well as the East Side transportation study. So when we enter that part of the draft recommendations, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jean Chartier, and he's going to go through the East Side transportation study. Then I'll come back and walk through the citywide, the overall transportation master plan before we get on to conclude our presentation, just to let you know what the next steps are. Then Jeremiah will come back and help to facilitate the question and answer time. Myself, Jean, members of the city's staff are all here to have a dialogue with you and answer questions. That's just an overview of how we're going to structure our time today. Starting off with the project timeline, for the Transportation Master Plan, we are in phase 4, where we're coming out with draft recommendations for all modes of travel, as well as policy initiatives that we think are important to help implement the Transportation Master Plan and make these infrastructure recommendations successful. We've already gone through phases 1 through 3. And the final phase is to prepare the report. We want to take your feedback from this session, and we're doing another similar session tonight at 6:30. And the different people and groups that we've been talking to, including some of your counselors, and come forward. We are planning in March to your council to give a similar presentation reflecting your comments on the infrastructure recommendations and policy initiatives for the Transportation Master Plan. Just to remind you of the council approved strategy, this is really a transformative strategy for the city of Peterborough that has an aggressive investment in your sidewalk network. The cycling master plans, which has also been being developed, and you might be well aware of, the hybrid accelerate spark scenario, which has a large increase in both cycling infrastructure, as well as a significant investment in programming and different initiatives to help encourage people to cycle in the city. A heavy emphasis as well on transit improvements to greatly improve the number of service hours that transit is operating, and parking policy development to try to help promote sustainable travel and other initiatives, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. But altogether, this is really an aspirational vision to bring us to a point where 35% of trips are not by car. They're by other more sustainable modes, be them walking, cycling, or taking transit. And if we can achieve this, this is a type of mode split that in a previous study WSP had done, that is what they were seeing around the North York Center area of Toronto, which has the subway and an extensive bus network connecting to that subway. So it's a really big move for Peterborough, and we're really excited to be here with you today to give you more of the details of what projects are part of that and infrastructure is part of that. So as I go on to the next slide, just wanted to remind you on some of the strategic road network improvements, because you're going to see these reflected as we go through our presentation, both from the East Side study as well as the overall TMP. We came out in November and said we would not be recommending north-south arterial on the west side of the city, but that we did see there could be a need for east-west connections across the river, as well as some north-south congestion that we'd want to try to address on the east side of the city. So on the west side, we're looking at trying to improve safety and operations through localized improvements to intersections. You'll see there are some road improvements as well. We're trying to look citywide, but you'll be going to see in the next couple of slides how these items that we identified on a strategic level are now coming to you in recommendations. So as we get into those recommendations, I'm in a moment going to stop sharing my screen and invite Jean Chartier from Paradigm to come forward and present the draft recommendations from the East Side Transportation Study that's been ongoing at the city level as well. With that, I'll stop and hand it over to you, Jean. Great, I can see your screen, Jean.
Yeah, there we go.
And I can hear you now.
There we go. Thanks. Yes. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the Public Information Center regarding both the city-wide transportation master plan and specifically what I'm going to be talking about for the next little while is the East Side Transportation Study. This study is looking more specifically at the area of the city east of the river and north of Lansdowne. And this is our second public information center today. So just to briefly overview for you the study area that we're specifically looking at, as I mentioned, it's east of the river, north of Lansdowne, to just beyond the city limits to the east. We do have included some aspects of the county's transportation network within the study area, given the fact that there is some interrelationship between the city road network and the county road network. So what we're trying to do through the East Side study is come up with more detailed recommendations specific to this area that then will be implemented in conjunction with the overall transportation master plan. So what we're looking to do is assess the transportation infrastructure needs and priorities within the East Side study area and recommend improvements that are needed to serve planned growth in this area, specifically the Liftlock secondary plan area and the Ashburnum village development. Those development areas are south of Parkhill, west of Television Road, and constitute some significant growth that is planned to happen within that area of the city. We're undertaking the East Side Transportation Study in accordance with the municipal class environmental assessment and specifically the master planning process that's identified within the municipal class EA. I know that's a lot of jargon for folks, but basically what it means is we're conducting the project in accordance with an approved provincial process to ensure that we meet the requirements of the Provincial Environmental Assessment Act for the infrastructure improvements that come out the other end of the study. The municipal class EA process typically has 5 phases, and specifically for the work that we're doing through the master plan, we're addressing phases 1 and 2. So we previously spent some time information gathering and identifying problems and opportunities, and that was presented to folks through our first public information center, which I'll talk about in a second. We're now through phase 2 of the alternative solutions part, looking at what the preferred alternative solutions are to address the identified problems and opportunities within the East Side study area, as well as coming up with an implementation strategy to go forward once the study is over. We still have to prepare our study report, but we're sort of a good way through the study at this point in time now. Now, as mentioned, we've had a previous public information center last summer, ran from sort of mid-June to mid-July. And at that point in time, we presented background on the study and information about the municipal Class CA process, the study area, the problems and opportunities, some potential alternative solutions, as well as the next steps in the process. And based on that information that was presented, we received feedback from a number of interested parties and stakeholders. A lot of it focused around ensuring that the future transportation plan for the east side took into consideration all modes of transportation, the need for improvements to bridge crossings, both to accommodate vehicles as well as other modes of transportation, certainly came up high on people's lists of priorities for wanting to see in the east side area in the future. And then, sort of anything that was related to, ensuring that the growth within the east side area was properly accommodated from a transportation perspective. Now, through our work to date, we've identified a series of transportation issues which are reflected in the problems and opportunities statement, which I'll discuss in just a second. And these were presented through our first round of public information center last summer. So, sort of looking at the various transportation issues that are of concern in the east side area. As mentioned, there's some issues with respect to transit service and coverage, the need for crossings of the river and the canal for cycling, as well as walking, making walking a little bit more achievable for people through the provision of additional infrastructure. There is some traffic congestion for certain movements at some of the intersections in the study area, and they are projected to only get worse into the future. Then we also looked at what needs to be done specifically with Ashburnum Drive, because there are, it's an important connection through the east side area, and the city has already taken steps to improve the roadway and expand the roadway to the south of the study area, but haven't taken steps on the section north of Mariah Street. So we're looking at what needs to be done with Ashburnum Drive. So that's identified as a concern. And as I mentioned, the need for additional east-west crossings of the watercourses is a concern. So based on the research that we've done to date and the identification of the problems and opportunities, really what we're trying to accomplish through the East Side study is accommodate the significant growth that's anticipated to happen within the East Side area with enhanced transportation system improvements, a variety of different modes to be accommodated, as well looking at the city's approved transportation master plan strategy, which Brett just reviewed, specifically the objective to reduce single occupant vehicle use and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then, as an outcome of the study, what we're trying to do is look at identifying the specific infrastructure and other transportation system improvements that are needed within specifically the East Side study area. So in terms of the alternative solutions that we considered for the East Side study area, we broke them into 4 groups, with the first alternative being the do nothing, which in essence maintains the existing transportation network and service levels, and then compared a series of additional alternatives against the do nothing. So alternative 2, what we've identified as the alternative solution in this case, is implementing the recommendations that are already coming forward as a result of the citywide transportation master plan, the cycling master plan, and the city's transit study, excluding any of the new or widened roads within the East Side transportation study area that are identified in the version of the citywide transportation master plan that's available for consultation right now. So that's sort of the first alternative, is to look at what would happen without expanding any of the roads in the East Side study area or making any changes to the roads as well. The second alternative, or alternative 3, in terms of some specific infrastructure related alternative, is to modernize the aging and deficient infrastructure within the study area. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And finally, the fourth alternative, or alternative 4 that we're looking at, is expanding the road network. And we've broken that into both into north-south and east-west roads. And this is sort of where it's been important for us to link with the overall citywide transportation plan, because the forecasting that the city and Brett and his team have done on an overall citywide basis has identified the need for additional north-south and river crossing road capacity within the east side area. So that's really become our focus, is identifying the preferred means of meeting that future need. So alternative 1, the do nothing alternative, is, as I mentioned, just to maintain what the city has and really make no further modifications. But really, this really doesn't achieve the solution to the identified problems and opportunities. So we didn't carry it forward for the purposes of detailed evaluation. Obviously, any of the other alternatives would be compared against the do nothing for the purposes of ensuring that that the do nothing is not the preferred means of moving forward. But it really wasn't studied in any further detail because it doesn't address the problems and opportunities. The second alternative of implementing the citywide TMP, cycling master plan, and transit study recommendations looks at the series of already planned transportation projects and service changes that impact the east side transportation study area. So there are a number of already planned works in terms of cycling network improvements, walking pedestrian network improvements, as well as the transit service improvements that Brett referred to earlier, that will happen regardless of if there are future roadworks within the east side area. So that was our sort of our alternative 2, and we felt that it partially addressed some of the problems and opportunities, but it was not sufficient as a standalone solution. It does factor into all of the 2 remaining alternatives because this is going to happen independent of any infrastructure recommendations within the east side area. So it's important to recognize that these changes will occur, but in and of themselves, they aren't sufficient to address the identified problems and opportunities. Now, as part of alternative 2, we have identified some key intersection improvements that would form part of it, and that get carried forward into the remaining alternatives. So alternative 3 and 4 that we talk about. So we've identified those intersection improvements to carry forward as well. Now, our third alternative, which we've called modernizing aging and/or deficient infrastructure, is aimed at upgrading or replacing any of the existing roads or bridges within the east side study area that don't meet present day needs and/or design criteria. And there's a number of those that we looked at. We looked at realigning Ashburnum Drive, upgrading Manise Avenue, Old Norwood Road, and McFarland Street. So whether that would be to a more urban standard, given that growth is going to occur within the area. Looking at a new crossing of the canal to replace or to supplement the Hunter Street crossing, or sorry, the McFarland Street crossing. We also looked at a potential realignment of Hunter Street and a new 2-lane canal crossing without widening the existing river crossing, but just putting a new crossing in place of Hunter Street in lieu of the current lift lock structure. And then that would be extended over to Television Road. And then finally, looking at construction along Parkhill Road as a fifth option within this category. We also wanted to note that there are other ongoing initiatives, both by Parks Canada to replace the Mariah Street Canal crossing or rehabilitate it, as well as the city is looking at improvements to Television Road, specifically across the South Mead Creek, as well as the North End and Trent University area environmental assessment that's ongoing, that's looking at further roadworks in the area just south of Trent U in that circle that's shown. Now, as I mentioned, our alternative 4, we broke it into 2 parts, a north-south roads versus east-west roads part. And the description of the works is similar between the two alternatives. Basically, what we would be doing in these cases would be adding new roads or modifying existing ones to serve growth and accommodate all users. So in the north-south direction, we looked at a series of different options. One was extending Ashburnum Drive from its current terminus at Old Norwood, McFarlane area up to Parkhill. It's an improvement, or it's a new road project that had been identified through previous studies. We also looked at widening Ashburnum Drive from Lansdowne to Mariah. We also looked at Television Road widening and potential widening of Peterborough County Road 4 and realigning it to make a more continuous north-south connection between TV Road, County Road 4, and University Road. We did think about whether there was some merit of looking at a connection of Armour to Ashburnum, because a lot of the traffic demand that happens on Ashburnum south of Mariah is driven by traffic that comes from the north along Armour. But that improvement is really really not feasible given some pretty significant property impacts, as well as the tight space for crossing over and under the river, over or under the canal, as well as the railway that's in the area. And then finally, our fourth, an alternative for our second grouping of road network expansion is in the east-west direction. And that's really to address the need to get over the river with additional traffic capacity. And this because the river and the Trent Severn waterway are so close, you do need to consider them together. So we looked at a widening of Parkhill Road and the river crossing, extending Mariah Street to Television Road. There currently is a corridor reserved by the city for that potential road improvement. Looking at the connection of Mariah Street to Sherbrooke Street, including a Mariah Street extension over to Television Road, recognizing that project could occur in different parts, recognizing that there certainly are some challenges to implementation and concerns associated with that. So it is one though that we did look at in give it some serious consideration. And then finally, also looking at widening of Lansdowne. As mentioned, the city is doing the EA for the North End and Trent University area, and there is some discussion about some widening of roads within that area in the east-west direction. So we took all of those alternatives that I just shared with you, and we ran them through an evaluation based on these sort of 4 factor groups of transportation, environment, social, and economic. There is a lot of detail in the evaluation process that's available on the Connect PTBO site that provides further detail and information that would be very difficult to share through this sort of medium, given a lot of the detail that's associated. But there is further information available, and we encourage you to go have a look at it on the Connect PTBO site. So based on the evaluation process, we've come up with the following recommendations. Based on the review that we've done, we're recommending implementing, obviously, the citywide transportation master plan, cycling master plan, and transit study recommendations, as they will factor in, regardless of if there are any road or infrastructure improvements within the east side area. We've identified select items of infrastructure to improve. So of all of the different options we looked at, as mentioned on the previous slide, we felt that the Hunter Street realignment, new connection over the Trent Severn waterway, really didn't provide much additional value, didn't address the problems and opportunities very well. So it's not carried forward as a part of our recommended solution. And then finally, we are recommending some expansion of the road network in the east side area. Specifically, what we're looking at is all of the improvements that we'd identified on the previous slides save and accept, we don't see the merit of extending Ashburnum up to Parkhill, given the anticipated future traffic flows and travel demands that have been forecasted with the city's travel forecasting model, as well as we don't see the merit or value of widening Lansdowne to 7 lanes from its current configuration. So those are the recommended solutions that are intended to help resolve the transportation issues while balancing the costs and any potential negative effects associated with them. For the purposes of trying to get a better sense in terms of how these various projects might fit together, we've done a preliminary staging analysis that intends to lay out the various initiatives that are identified specific to the East Side Transportation Study Area into some logical groupings in terms of what might come first, in terms of then what needs to come second. And we've broken them into 3 priority groups. So the initial group of priorities would be the intersection improvements that can be accomplished without having to dramatically change the road network at this time. There would be the Ashburnum Drive realignment, which is a really important project from the perspective that it addresses some concerns about its location within the floodline associated with the Trent-Severn waterway. So it would help address an existing operational concern that the city has. We also think that in the early stages, the urbanization of Manise, Old Norwood, and McFarland are good steps to make forward in terms of given the fact the area is urbanizing, and it will provide a little of additional support for growth in the area. And looking at the new McFarland Street Canal crossing before considering anything on Parkhill, recognizing that there needs to be additional relief before one would consider anything further on Parkhill. So then in the next group of priorities, as mentioned, there's the Parkhill reconstruction, which would be east of Armour Road, and then looking at Television Road widening, looking at works on County Road 4, which would be subject to Peterborough County's participation and moving the work forward. Looking at then expanding Parkhill Road and the river crossing, and looking at Ashburnum Drive widening to the south. And then in the much longer term, we envision that there may be a need at some point for a Sherbrooke Street to Mariah Street connection, with Mariah extended over to Television Road, recognizing fully that certainly presents challenges and a significant water crossing. So at this point in time, it's being recommended for corridor protection for the city to ensure that should the need present itself in the longer term future, that the opportunity is preserved to be able to implement the connection. As I mentioned, there might be a widening of the bridge over the canal, which would help facilitate the connection of Armour to Ashburnum, but that could occur separately. Again, that would be a challenging project in and of itself, given the nature of the bridge configuration that is there today. So in terms of next steps, we're putting together our recommendations and report, which will be presented to City Council later this winter, early spring. We're putting together the notice of study completion once the recommendations are presented to City Council and accepted. We would then be looking at, assuming that the recommendations are approved, moving forward with phase 3 of the municipal Class EA process for the Ashburnum Drive realignment. And then ultimately would be a number of further studies that would have to go forward for municipal class environmental assessments for all of the other road projects that have been identified. And those will be identified through future city capital budgets and forecasts. So with that, I'm going to conclude my part of the presentation and hand it back over to Brett. But we just wanted to remind you that it really is, we do thank you for participating in the process. We really do want to hear from you in terms of your comments. We have an online comment form on the Connect PTBO site. We would encourage you to use that to offer your commentary if you can. Alternatively, if you do wish to reach out to the study team, we have a dedicated email address, as well as our phone numbers for myself and Robert Dunford are listed there. And although we will accept comments, we would really appreciate any immediate questions or concerns by February the 11th to allow us to continue along the timeline that City Council is expecting in terms of presentation of the reports. So with that, Brett, I'll turn it back to you and let you have the screen back.
Thank you very much, Gene. I'll go back to sharing my screen, and then I'll continue on with the Transportation Master Plan, the overall Transportation Master Plan presentation. And you'll see how what Gene has been speaking about will be reflected on some of these slides as I go through. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with the road network improvements, and then talk about some transit priority measures that we think can help the transit vehicles maintain their schedule and help make them more attractive to gain additional riders. I'm going to highlight a couple of aspects of the cycling master plan, which has been ongoing as well at the city level. And then I'm going to talk about a number of different key policy initiatives to tell you our approach and some of the draft policy directives that are coming out of that approach that we think are really important to help implement the infrastructure as well that is being recommended here. So to begin with the road network, the picture on your right is going to stay in the same spot, but I'm going to go through a series of 3 slides to talk about different types of recommendations, just to make it a little bit easier, because there's a number of types of recommendations, and they're really citywide. So rather than put up one map to start, we are going to do this in piecemeal. And so on the screen right now, the green lines are roadway reconstruction. And what do we mean by roadway reconstruction? That would be it could be what we call a rural cross section, which has a shoulder, a paved shoulder, or a gravel shoulder and a ditch, would be replaced with a curb and a gutter. And also could be sidewalks, cycling facilities. So things that will help other modes of transportation and will provide some of those that aren't there today, such as a sidewalk. So you'll see that in a couple of places, like along Brayley on the west side of the city, I'll just point out. And also, as part of that, there would be some improvements to some intersections that would go along with those works that can help to improve safety, make sure that we have adequate crossings for accessibility purposes and for all modes of transportation. And then also on the screen, you can see in purple or in blue, some future corridors and road realignments that we think also the future corridors will be needed at a later date as development occurs. As you know, perhaps on the north end of your city, there's planned development in that area. So there'll be some additional road network that will be constructed as part of that, and realignment on the east side and some improvements on the east side going along with what Gene was just speaking about. So these are the first group of road network improvements that I want to address. And now we've added a number of different items onto the screen now to show areas for intersection, operation, and safety improvements. We've heard safety time and time again throughout our presentations, throughout our consultation. And so we see opportunity to improve safety and also improve just the flow of whatever mode of traffic is going through the intersection at certain locations. Sometimes there might be a unsignalized, like a stop controlled intersection, say along Brayley, that we could convert to a signal that would help the flow, that would help maybe reduce rear end collisions if people are driving, provide signalized crossings for pedestrians, cyclists, people who are not in a car. So there's you'll see several of those along the west side of the city. And then also the yellow lines are showing to provide a center turn lane. So you'll see that on the north end along Chemung, on the south end, at several locations along Lansdowne, just to highlight a few. This is providing a center turn lane so that anyone who is turning left would be out of the way of people who are going through. So this is also seen as a safety initiative as well, because it reduces the likelihood of a rear end collision if someone was slowing down to turn left and if I didn't notice it, and if I was driving a car and struck them. But now if there's a left turn lane, a center turn lane that they can exit off of the through lane, that will help just the flow of traffic and also enable those turning movements, both like into places and even if you had to use that to get out of a place if you're entering the road. So you'll see those in yellow at a number of different locations. These are the next group of recommendations that are part of the road network improvements. And then the final group is showing some strategic road widening. So Gene has talked about a couple that you see on the east side of the river in red. He had mentioned Ashburnum Drive, Television Road, so you'll see those there. He noted to protect the corridor for potential, long-term potential of a bridge crossing between Sherbrooke and Mariah. So those are reflected. And you'll also see some works around the northern part of the city, around Trent University, as Gene mentioned, as part of the North End Environmental Assessment, which is ongoing. So we are reflecting those as well, and showing different areas. Like a key area that we've identified is all throughout this is our bridge crossings. So we do see a need to widen Parkhill to provide 4 lanes to facilitate movement. And although we don't have a lot of black dots along the red part of Parkhill, we would be improving intersections at the same time. We're not going to widen the road and not fix the intersection and come back later. I mean, we know that frustrates everybody and it's not a good use of funds. So we haven't put black dots there, but I did want to say, because we have noticed a number of challenging locations along Parkhill that could use some improvement on the intersections to improve the flow of traffic for all modes of transportation. And I'm really going to highlight that in the next set of slides that I'm going to. I might have skipped over, but there's a couple of areas that are shaded in a tan color. Those are subject to further study, be it areas on the north end of the city that are part of additional development, or somewhat in the central, west central area around the Parkway and Clonsilla that are under a Ministry of Environment order related to the Parkway. And also some work that needs to be done with the Ministry of Transportation and the county in the south end and on the east end, respectively. But this gives you kind of a complete picture of some road widenings, but a lot of initiatives that are trying to improve safety in terms of improving, making sure we have safer crossings for pedestrians and cyclists, opportunities to help transit vehicles, providing some safety-related capacity by adding center turn lanes that also can help just the flow of traffic. This is kind of giving you our comprehensive picture, looking to also provide facilities like I had mentioned. Just to summarize, if we urbanize a cross section, so taking it from a ditch, a shoulder and a ditch to a curb and a gutter and a sidewalk and appropriate cycling facilities. So a comprehensive view of the road network improvements, but now I'm going to go ahead and move into some transit priority measures, because transit is running on the same network as cars and trucks. So we want to see, are there ways to enhance transit to make it more attractive? And so I just want to give a little bit of background to kind of get us all on the same page in terms of what do we mean by transit priority treatments. So these allow transit vehicles to bypass congestion in the general traffic lanes, like the lanes that you and I are driving in, and increasing reliability and bus speed relevant to the automobile. Right? If you're making a connection, you have to be on time, or else you might miss your connection, and no one wants to do that, especially here in the winter, given the current winter conditions. So we are looking for ways to see if we can enhance transit through some priority measures, seeing that there's benefits on 3 different levels: for customers, people riding the transit, for the operators, and for the society, because a big push of this is to help us reduce our total greenhouse gas emissions. So if we can put in some measures for transit that can help people who are riding it, that make it more efficient to operate, then we're going to have like bigger benefits overall, as well as we'll be able to attract more riders and reduce our total greenhouse gas emissions. Transit priority needs 2 things to happen to make it worth our money, to make it worth our investment in our financial resources. So we need routes that have higher ridership, and we also are looking for routes that are operating in unstable traffic conditions where there are slow travel speeds or congestion that is, you can't always predict like when you're going to arrive. So both of these conditions are required if we want to put in transit priority measures. And we also look at this on a number of different stages, as shown on your screen, like a stage of 0 to 4 is what we're calling it. So on routes that have a lower ridership and the traffic congestion is moderate or not so bad, those areas don't need additional investment. They're going to be able to operate within their schedules, generally within their schedules consistently. But as we increase the number of riders and as we increase we're calling it performance delay, but that's really like how much traffic is on the road. Is there any delay for you as you're traveling by a vehicle or a bus? If we're seeing areas that have that delay, then those are the places that we're going to focus on to take our limited resources and focus on these areas to try to improve transit. So that could be just retiming the signals for transit. If most of the traffic is going north-south, we need to have a longer green time for that. And then we can progressively more in terms of what we can do in terms of, is there a signal specifically for transit so that the transit get a green light or for somebody driving does to try to get the transit moving faster. Or I'm actually coming to you from Markham today, and near where I live, they built bus-only lanes for a number of kilometers. We don't have to necessarily go to that extent, but there could be areas for an intersection where you could have a localized bus lane that would enable the bus to move to the head of the class, to move to the front of the queue, and so that they aren't going to be stuck behind all the other vehicles. They'll be at the front, and when the light turns green, the signal turns green, they're able to proceed. So that is where we have like the highest ridership and we see high congestion. And so on the next two slides, I'm going to illustrate a couple of areas that we have found these conditions that are potentials for transit prioritization. We start off with some corridors, and so you can see we have a lot of ridership from Trent University, and so there's some corridors that are going to and from there and connecting to the downtown that we've identified as transit signal priority corridors. Also on the south end along Lansdowne, see that as a corridor for transit signal priority. And you can see that along we have it also on the table, just giving like the names of the corridors and exactly where we're talking about. We're trying to illustrate that on the map as well. And to see that, we're getting a high ridership here, and there also can be a high delay. So these are corridors that we're focusing on as this is where we could help to invest in transit. And then if we were going to go to a level of saying, we can put in a bus-only lane for a short stretch or some other higher level treatment. We've identified 4 spots on your screen here and also summarized in the table. And I had been talking about the improvements along Parkhill that we're recommending in the road network. And so you can see that here as well. So that with those improvements, there's the opportunity to also improve intersections and improve items for transit vehicles getting through those intersections to help them maintain their on-time status. That's a big part of getting more people to ride transit, knowing that they can depend on it, that it's going to be there when they need it, and it will get them to their destination on time. So we've identified one up near Trent University, and you can see actually 3 of them. All 3 of those are along that Parkhill corridor that could provide opportunities to provide additional measures to improve transit. I'm next going to go on to our cycling network. So the city has been working hard on a cycling master plan, and you can find out more about that on the Connect PTVO website. There's a page dedicated, just like there is for the transportation master plan and the East Side study. There's also one for the cycling network. And so the city staff and consulting team have come out with a cycling master plan that provides a blueprint to build a more cycling friendly city. And the map on your right is showing the overall network. And so the solid lines are what you already have today. And then the dotted lines are part of the recommendations that are part of the cycling master plan. It should be said that all of this isn't going to happen overnight for the transportation master plan or the cycling master plan. And Jean actually went through some of the prioritization and kind of like short, medium, long term. So these things would be incorporated over time. The horizon year that we're looking at in the transportation master plan is the year 2051. So we do have a long-term view. But here you can see a very much a comprehensive network that is being proposed that would allow you to get anywhere in the city, basically, using a bike. Policy initiatives are important to help us make these infrastructure more valuable, to make them, to leverage the investment in that, to help us get this shift in mode that we want to achieve, to bring that so that 35% of trips are not in the automobile, that are using some other mode of travel. So I'm gonna go through a series of different policy directives, and I'm gonna start with the concept of complete streets, which is really an umbrella policy for transportation planning that is really, it's an old concept that we kind of got away from for a period of time, and now we're getting back to. And it's simply that the transportation network should be designed for everybody and for all modes of travel. And so say after World War II, a lot of the transportation thinking was to design from the center of the road out. You start in the center, you provide for all of the vehicles, and then whatever is left over goes to anybody else. But in the 21st century, and certainly the last 10 to 20 years in the century, we have seen the thinking change to now say, no, we're going to start from the outside and work in, so that we can accommodate the most vulnerable users, the pedestrians, first, make sure that we have something for them. Think about the cyclists, think about the transit. We're always going to have space for roads, but we got to make sure that we provided for the most vulnerable users first. So let's start on the property line. Let's start on the outside and work our way in instead of opposite. So we're trying to plan for all modes of travel and everyone who's going to be using this. And so as part of that, what comes out of that as some draft initiatives is that if the city is building new streets, there's going to be sidewalks on both sides. There's going to be cycling if it's a collector or arterial road. Full stop. This is what is going to be part of the design of that road network. And we don't say cycling on local streets because typically the volume there is low enough that you don't need cycling. I cycle to work pre the pandemic, and if you're on a local street, it's perfectly comfortable, at least for me, without any facility. And so we tend to focus our cycling infrastructure dollars on collector and arterial roads. And same for transit. We don't have transit running on every single street. So, but the streets where transit is running or is forecast to run, we want to make sure there's transit amenities. We all probably can appreciate getting goods delivered to us. Or having our stores full if we go to the store. So we have to be considering a truck design. And this has to be made for Peterborough. It's not a one size fits all. So as part of this directives, the city can consider updating the design standards to make sure it's meeting these sub bullet points I have under that first point in terms of providing for all modes of transportation, and to make sure that the road network is tailored to better reflect the user's needs and who is using it. I talked about new streets, but if the city is doing road rehabilitation, like rebuilding an existing street, there could be opportunities there to add infrastructure that wasn't there originally. In each case will have to be a case-by-case basis, but we certainly want to use that opportunity to help complete the street. I had mentioned that not every street has to provide for every mode. And so it really is a network. And so if this street doesn't have a cycling facility, then we would like a parallel street to have one, just to make sure that there is connectivity by all modes of travel. I alluded some to goods movement on the previous slide. And so we've also been considering that as part of the transportation master plan to address ongoing concerns with truck travel on a policy level to help us determine, like, how should they be accommodated? Trucks are an important part of our economy. They represent a lot of jobs, not just for the person driving, but the person filling, the person unloading, and everyone else. So they're very important. And certainly my family has appreciated trucks who are able to deliver stuff to our home, or that we are able to get if we go to a store. And so we are trying to make sure that we can accommodate trucks within the overall city network to make sure like those local deliveries and also just to get goods to market. And so there already are trucks operating. That's not a surprise to anyone, but we wanted to identify like typical corridors that trucks need to use just to make sure that we can make sure that we're providing facilities there that are to make sure the road pavement is up to the standard that we want to accommodate trucks. In Markham, where I live, there's one spot where you go over, there's some rutting. It's like that maybe the constant use of trucks or other vehicles has made that that part of the road sink a little bit. Not too bad, but it's noticeable. So we want to make sure that we are providing for truck movements, both locally and regionally and province-wide, and that's part of our transportation master plan. And recognizing that the city is not an island, so we have to better connect to the county roads, to the provincial network as well. Road safety has come up time and time again throughout our transportation master plan consultation. So we've tried to address that as well through the transportation master plan with a number of different initiatives and like 5 different categories, which I'll show on the next screen, and to try to think of like how can we address in road safety those types of challenges with education, enforcement, and engineering measures. So these are items to help us make the road network safer and to reduce the number of collisions. And certainly we want to have 0 fatalities. So we want to get there. So we're trying to put a plan in place. It's a work in progress, and you know, it can be refined in the future, but we're excited to just put on the screen right now. These are the 5 different policy areas for safe school zones. I have 2 kids in high school. Safe school zones is very important to me personally, and we certainly recognize that for the city of Peterborough as well. Safety for vulnerable users, safe neighborhoods, safe corridors, and safe intersections. Intersections has come up a lot in our consultation to make sure that it's safe for people to cross, for if someone is biking, for whatever mode you're traveling. So you can see on the screen, and this presentation will be available online, so I'm not going to read each and every one of these, but we have different measures for engineering, that we can design things, that we can do enforcement, that we can do education that will help make our road network safer. Parking is something we've discussed at a couple of these public information centers as a way to help encourage more sustainable modes of travel, in terms of we want to make sure that parking sometimes is free, but nothing is in North America or in Canada, it's necessarily completely free. We need to be able to manage our parking and see like how are we managing the parking rates for city-owned parking facilities to encourage alternative modes of travel. But we're not here to penalize local businesses. That is absolutely not our intent, and you'll see a little bit more about that on the next slide. Working with owners of private parking lots to apply a similar approach so that it's consistent, and consider if there's additional locations to charge for parking. So some of our draft initiatives include increasing monthly parking rates to be more expensive, or at least equally as expensive as a bus pass. So currently in the city, it's $66 for an adult for a monthly bus pass. Some of the city-owned lots, their monthly rate is above that, but there are some that are below. So as a minimum, we want to make sure they all are at least as expensive as the bus, if not more, to encourage people to say there are other options. And they might even save money by using other options. We can consider other city-owned properties to institute paid parking. I might not be the most popular person coming out with these recommendations, but having come to your city hall, I was a little bit surprised to see that we did not have to pay to park there, but just about a block south you do. So the parking could be moved to the city hall and other parts of the city or other city-owned facilities. But if we're going to increase parking, we're not just going to do that unilaterally without thinking of other modes. If we want to shift people, if we increase the parking rate, what can we do for the other modes as well? So that could be increasing the amount of secure bike parking, enhancing transit service so that we have a stick of more higher parking, but we also want a carrot to say, here is some opportunity for you to use other modes. So there can be a pilot on-street parking permit program, looking at parking requirements for new developments. There's a number of different parking initiatives that were being considered. We're not here to penalize local business, but we are trying to help shift to more sustainable travel because we have these big goals and we have these big needs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so we see parking as part of the solution. Transit fare discount program. We want to encourage transit ridership. And how do we make travel by transit more equitable? So these are like two big questions that we're trying to address in the Transportation Master Plan. And so are there groups that would benefit from reduced fare programs? And then what are the costs as well? Like there'll be a financial cost by loss of revenue, but we have to also consider the benefits of such a program. We could have reduced ridership, reduced car dependency, increased ridership so that we can have reduced car dependency. More mobility options, and once again, coming back to those greenhouse gas emissions in terms of if we get more people riding transit and less driving cars, that can help to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. The city is already undertaking a pilot program for free transit for children 12 and under. So that we can see how that is going. And when it concludes, like what are the lessons learned? Can we apply that to future programs? There's an opportunity to expand that program for people 18 years of old and under in consultation and coordination with school boards. There could be an opportunity to pilot a reduced fare pass for low-income residents. And as I had mentioned before, we have to understand the costs and the benefits, so we should be monitoring those on an ongoing basis. Technology is constantly changing, and we need to leverage that for transportation as well. And then in terms of electric vehicles, that will help us to meet these climate change mitigation goals, and other parts of technology for smart mobility that can help us as well. So what infrastructure needs to be in place to really embrace those? And how does that affect goods movement? And how does that affect parking as well? If you have some kind of an app that directs you to where parking is available, it can prevent you from having to circle around and try to find available parking. And so you can see that on the screen here in terms of digital wayfinding and just being able to find parking. The federal government has recently had programs to help transit providers shift to low emission buses. So the city, when those programs are available, can apply for those, and provincial as well if they're available. Expanding the EV charging stations, electric vehicle charging stations. You already have some in place, but we could increase the number of those at where they already exist, or also put them in locations that are not at city-owned facilities. All of these items, we want to go ahead and leverage our technology to our benefit. We already see the private sector coming out with more and more hybrid vehicles or electric vehicles. So the private sector is already doing that. My family, we got ourselves a hybrid electric vehicle in 2020 to be, so we see it coming on more and more. And we want to try to leverage that through this Transportation Master Plan. I'm almost done. But we did want to also highlight the Cycling Master Plan policy directives. So the Cycling Master Plan, if you go online, you can read the executive summary and see different maps and whatnot. 23 different recommendations grouped into 5 different categories. So I've shown those 5 different categories on this slide and just given you like a taste of some of the recommendations, but there's 23 in total. I'm only showing 5. So please go ahead and avail yourself of this work as well, so you can understand what's being recommended. And the map on the screen is the Crosstown Network, like the key, if you're going to prioritize the routes to construct. And here under the yellow line in black, the black solid lines are what you have today, and the dotted lines are what is being proposed. And so if this network is realized, then this is like your main structure that will allow people to get to the main destinations in the city, and then that can be built upon with a smaller network, smaller or minor networks, let's say. So 23 different recommendations that also are being incorporated into the overall Transportation Master Plan that are coming out of the Cycling Master Plan. You've been a very attentive audience, so we're just going to let you know the next steps for the the transportation, and then we're going to go to our question and answer period. So we're having this same session again tonight. It'll be the same slides. We just want to make it as available to as many people as possible, and we'll have a question and answer session with that as well. And then also, like I said, being the same, so Gene will be here to also present the slides that he presented on the East Side study. Like Gene, we would love to have your comments by February the 11th. You can certainly contact us after that, But as we are trying to keep the council's expectation of coming to them in March with our recommendations, we really could use your comments by February 11th, because we want to factor those in to update or to modify or to enhance and improve this presentation and our recommendations and policy initiatives to reflect what's going to be best for Peterborough, because we hope to plan to present that to your council in March. With that, Jeremiah, I'm going to ask you to come back online and help us to facilitate the question and answer period. Myself and Jean are here. We have people from the city as well who can also help us answer. But Jeremiah, I'll turn it over to you to help either have people speak or go through questions that are in the chat, please. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Brett. Before we continue, I just want to thank Councilor Purnell for attending. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here for the meeting today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I learn something new every single time I see one of these, so it's a great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As Brett mentioned, we'll be starting the Q&A portion of the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to use the raise hand function, and I'll call on people in the order in which I see your hands come up. If you would like to type in a question via the chat box, feel free to do that as well. And I know we have a few people who are calling in via mobile devices. If you are calling in via mobile device and you want to raise your hand, you can do that by pressing *9. I see a hand up from Mohammed. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question whenever you're ready.
Hi, thank you very much for this really excellent presentation. I just have a couple of questions, and I heard you talk about how the fare to the parking needs to change in order to incentivize people to not drive their cars and really get on the bus. I want to ask you if you think this would be really realistic given the current political reality. Would council approve this given probably that there's going to be an intense opposition to increasing the cost when the majority of people still rely on driving cars? So I feel like there needs to be potentially some more nudging kind of behavioral economics theory to try to really change that gradually. I'm just I would love to see that happen. I have seen it with my own eyes with a friend of mine who went and bought a car. She said, well, I no longer need to get on the bus because it doesn't make sense anymore. I pay at least $2.5 per ride on the bus, and then I don't need to pay for parking most of the time, so I just will drive my car. So I think that there needs to be I think the political reality as well plays here. And my second question quickly is I think I raised this before, I think the bus system also needs to have trackers of the bus where they are and upload that on a Google map so that people can see live where the bus is and when it's coming, because I had that a few times when Google Maps says something and the bus just doesn't come, like bus 11A, which takes me to Trent University from my apartment at Trail College. Sometimes it's supposed to come 3 times an hour, but sometimes it skips one of those and we don't know when it does that because it's not live on Google Maps. And I think that would really immensely serve the population that gets on the bus, is to have GPS tracker that uploads the position of each bus as it moves so that people can see it as it approaches on something like Google Maps.
Thank you. Brett, perhaps we can go to you first and then to the city if they have anything additional to add.
Thanks, Jeremiah, and thank you very much for those questions. I'll go ahead and start with the parking, and then I'll go on to that transit, and then the city, if they'd like to, of course, can come in as well. It's important to remember that this is a long-term vision. We're looking to the year 2051. These projects, if council takes some action in March, it doesn't mean that April 1st, these things are all starting. It's a long-term vision, and there will have to be additional consultation, certainly regarding parking, but there's a lot of data out there, it sounds like you're already aware of, and a lot of research that's shown that the price of parking will affect how people travel. I said during the presentation, we're not here to penalize local business that operates in an area with paid parking and shift people to go travel to some other business that has free parking, so to speak. So we're not here to do that. We were looking at the monthly parking for people who are parking all day, not just for a customer who's going to a store. It certainly will be an ongoing dialogue. but we want to put it on the table, because if we're serious about changing how people travel, if we're serious about addressing greenhouse gas emissions, and certainly everything we've heard throughout this process has said that we are serious, and we at WSP are serious as well, then we think that this is part of the solution. I'll go on to the transit for a second, and then I'll just stop to see, because I think Kevin Jones, your transportation manager, would like to speak. For transit, we have a big investment in transit. And so I can certainly hear your concerns about you need to know when the bus is coming. And so I'll let Kevin speak to that a little bit more, but certainly as part of this major investment, it's not going to be just more buses, but I think there would be a number of items that would be part of that rollout to make the buses, to make it more efficient for people who, the bus is running, but also the people using it. I might stop there, and Jeremiah, I'll ask Kevin if you'd like to add to either of those answers.
Sure. Thank you, Brett. Yeah, I mean, in terms of bus tracking, we are actually actively working on a project right now to install that on all of our city buses. It probably will be going live within the next few months. Just working on a few technical details at this point, but our system will be able to track our buses in real time. There will be an app that you can download on your phone that will be able to give you live updates, bus arrival times at the stops in real time. You can even get notifications of disruptions, to your normal bus routes if those things happen. Like, for example, when we go on snow routes on a day like today, sometimes we might bypass or miss a few stops that we can't get to, and those kind of notifications will go out as part of that system. So look for that to roll out this year. Like I said, we're hoping to roll that out in the next few months. Our team has been busily working in the background to get all the equipment installed on the buses to allow that to happen, and to get all the software applications ready. The other idea that was mentioned in there is about the feasibility, I guess, of a fare discount program for transit. And as Brett mentioned, this is a 30-year plan, and some things we're going to have to evolve to as we can afford it. And I see these as strategic investments, even though we may be making transit free or less cost for certain groups to try and encourage ridership. We're going to try and do that strategically, but also within the realm of sort of budget affordability and through our council and through the budget process, where we can make those changes. So it will happen over time. I'm not going to promise that can happen day one. We've already implemented the pilot for children under 12. So we're certainly going to let that pilot run its course, and then we'll get some lessons learned out of that. And maybe we can expand that eligibility for reduced fares, in future years to other groups, and use those lessons learned. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. We have a hand up from Kirk as well. Kirk, feel free to mute yourself whenever you're ready.
Okay, you can hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I just have a few comments. Firstly, it's very disappointing just to see one councillor attending the. I'm glad to see that Leslie Parnell is here. I'm not sure if the other councillors were planning on attending tonight, but the ramifications of this this document are millions and millions of dollars. So it's very, very important. So especially when they get the final decision of what's going to get done. It's very sad to see only one councillor is here. Secondly, I really like to see the improvements of Television Road corridor, but I think that the bridge over Mead Creek needs priority. That bridge, which should have probably been replaced 10 years ago. And if there's an accident there, that bridge is going to be considered substandard if it's not already. And any of the development along there, along Television Road, there's currently a subdivision there now, but more lots are planned for in between Television and Armour Road. So that needs to be considered. And Ontario Hydro is not very quick to react, so I'm sure the city staff is on top of that. My other comment is, and this is not a knock to the consulting team, but what I've seen that you presented city staff. It's all information that city staff has had and is working towards being the engineering department, the planning department, the parking, transit, cycling, walking, public works, etc. So what does the consulting team bring to the table? And when you present this to council, I saw those two lists of all the jobs that are prioritized. So what happens when council doesn't agree or put an emphasis on where the money should be spent, as opposed to coddling their people that vote in their wards? So thanks very much.
Thank you. We can go to Brett and Jean to see if there's anything to add on that, perhaps to the city after.
I'll just start with the last comment if I could, and I'll leave the east side regarding TV Road and Mead Creek to Jean perhaps. But when we stand up in front of council, what we are bringing is a lot of technical analysis and a lot of consultation. And so WSP does not want to stand in front of your council, it's going to be me, unless I have data. We want to have evidence-based decision making, and I cannot stand in front of your council unless we have done enough technical analysis to make sure that we feel comfortable making these recommendations. So we've been working for over a year on this study, and we've had this is our third public information center, and we've had other rounds of online engagement and consultation to try to bring all of these items together, to use the data that we have available to work with the city to understand the future forecast for the year 2051, and to kind of put together a multimodal puzzle of recommendations that are backed by analysis and that have been confirmed and adjusted and enhanced by people like yourself and others who have that firsthand knowledge of living in the city, working in the city, traveling through the city, to help us come up with a plan. And we're also adding their policy directives that we think are very, very important to make this plan a reality. When we, like I was trying to say though, that this is not going to be implemented overnight, and it is your council that does control, rightly so, the finances, and we will have a prioritized list of improvements similar to what Jean had talked about for the east side, of short, medium, and long. And sometimes priorities change, and sometimes we don't have the resources that we need, and sometimes we can get the resources. Like I'd mentioned, the federal government has recently had a grant for low emission buses. That might not have been available before, but now it's available. We can use that to our benefit. So the consulting team is bringing technical analysis, our experience of best practice in Ontario and across Canada and even other places in the world, and a data-driven approach that's been steeped in a lot of consultation to give our best recommendation for how to meet the vision that's been set out for this transportation master plan, and to meet the objectives and the council priorities, 4 council priorities, which I didn't have on a slide today, but regarding shifting the way people travel to more sustainable modes, having a financially sustainable program, addressing greenhouse gas emissions. And there's a 4th one that's skipping my mind right now, so maybe I shouldn't try to have listed them. But we've been using those to guide our process, and that is going to enable us to stand in front of council in March, we trust, to make this presentation. You had a number of different points, but I might ask Jean if you would want to comment on the ones from the East Side study.
Thanks, Brett. Kevin Jones has actually made a note in the chat window to talk specifically about Parkhill Road. I would just add that the question about Television Road, the city is in the process of doing a environmental assessment site for addressing the bridge over Mead Creek. So it's recognized it does need to happen, and it would happen before you'd think about widening Television Road. So I think your point, Kirk, about wanting to make sure that happens first, I think has been recognized by the city.
Perfect. We have a question as well in the chat. It is, what would your projection be for the earliest shovel in the ground timing for the shorter term recommendations? Brett, that would be for the TMP.
A lot of these projects, they're on different scales. And so the larger projects, like if it's going to cost more than $2.5 million to implement, it would go on to the next step of the municipal class environmental assessment process, which would be a Schedule C environmental assessment, so that you look at all of the environmental impacts, and then you come up with design solutions. You look at different alternatives and you come up with a design solution. That you would do that study first before you went to the detailed design, before you went to construction. Some of the smaller projects could be implemented on a shorter scale, shorter timeline, but it is a process, but you need this plan in place to know where you're going. But I might let Kevin also answer that, because it's be his group and your city staff that's going to help to make it happen, to get it to implement. But that is just to give you a sense that some of these will require additional study, and that there's a process in place to do that. And it goes through environmental assessment, through a Schedule C, before you would get to the detailed design, so someone knows what to build before you actually get to construction. I might turn it over to Kevin though.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Yeah, that's a very important point to recognize, because some of these are very large projects. The Environmental Assessment Act does require additional work on some of the bigger projects to look at, different design alternatives, do more public consultation. We got to get more detailed into the design work for some of the projects, and that will take some time. But some of the projects on the list that we've identified are actually projects that are in process as well. So things like the Lansdowne Street West widening on out by Clonsilla, that's a project that our staff are in detailed design with right now. We do expect that project to be moving forward, subject to availability of funding from council. Some of the other intersection improvements are also projects that are underway in various levels of design, either being implemented through development or city-run projects. So some of them you'll actually see shovels in the ground on some projects. I would dare to say perhaps this summer. Other projects, as Brett mentioned, will require a little longer timelines to do some planning for, and some additional public consultation. And then of course we have to allocate budget, because there's not a money tree in the backyard of City Hall. So we have to look at our available finances and where they fit into all the other priorities that the city has to fund. And our council will provide some guidance on that as we move forward each year. Thanks.
All right, thank you. We have a hand up from Stephen as well. Stephen, you should be able to unmute yourself anytime.
Hi. See if I can make my camera work. Presentation, that was great. I'm interested in knowing the follow-on to that question about the shovel in the ground timing with respect to the development charges and how some of the infrastructure improvements would be paid for. Because I'm assuming it looks like most of these are growth related, and so they should properly be paid for by development charges. But I am concerned that a lot of them will be tacked on to property tax. So that's one question. The other was that my read of the bus transportation priority slides was that there probably should be some kind of dedicated bus lanes along Water Street between downtown and the university. And I just wondered if Brett might comment on that. So thanks.
Yeah, Brett, you can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Jeremiah. To start with the development charges, and that's a big driver for why a city will want to do a transportation master plan. The development charges need to have justification, technical justification. Just like I had mentioned, we want technical justification before we present to council. To get your development charges through, those go through consultation as well with like developers, and they will push back. So you need to have something like a transportation master plan to support those development charges. And certainly the projects that are in a transportation master plan, I mean, it's up to the city, but they often are then included in development charges so that it's not solely on the tax base to provide for those. I'll answer the transit priority one, and then maybe if the city wants to comment, that'd be great. For transit priority, certainly Water Street is one of those corridors that could benefit from transit priority. We're trying to balance things. There's also a corridor that'd be big benefit for additional cycling facilities. So that's like some of those are the details that still have to be worked out to make sure there's space for the different modes of travel. because as many people are taking, let's say, transit on Water Street, maybe going to Trent University to and from, there could be an opportunity to also be biking there. Of course, some already are, and we could enhance that through the cycling network. So as I think you notice, like there are a number of different routes in that northern part of the city that do provide some access to places like Trent University that are ideal candidates to look in further detail to look for transit priority measures.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Brett, that with respect to development charges, we already do have a development charge bylaw that that looks at infrastructure that is needed to support new growth and apportioning a portion of the costs of that infrastructure to development charges that get charged, under the price of every residential and commercial unit that gets built in the city. And studies like this will be used to update those development charge bylaws in the future, so that when we start looking at the cost of implementing this program, we bring that into the development charge bylaw to make sure that we're collecting a portion of the cost from new growth to help pay for the infrastructure needed to support new growth. And then obviously there's always other forms of funding that we look for, whether it be federal infrastructure funding, provincial infrastructure funding, and secondly through our own capital levy to fund projects that are needed today that really are needed irrespective of growth. So it is it's certainly a good point, and we'll be using this study to help inform our future development charge bylaws.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thanks. I see a hand up from Braden as well.
Yes, hi. Thanks. Thanks for the great presentation. It was very informative. I have a question regarding the East Side Transportation Study recommended solutions. So I believe it would be Jean addressing it. But if we were to go back to that list of recommended solutions, I understand in the past conversations that there was the potential to do a crossing of the canal at Hunter Street and or a tunneling underneath. And I just wanted to confirm, in looking at that recommended solutions, that that is no longer being contemplated.
Jean, you can go ahead on that.
Great, thanks very much, Sharma. So Braden, we did look at it in terms of, because as you can appreciate, the historic lift lock structure, is certainly a treasure, and long term, it's you never know what's going to happen to it long term. So the city wanted to be prepared and to consider, was that a preferred option? So we did a little bit of research on it, looked at, from an engineering feasibility perspective, and so it would be pretty challenging to implement something there. It also doesn't benefit the transportation network overly, because the city doesn't really want to be directing traffic onto the section of Hunter Street between the river and the Trent Severn waterway. It's a great area through there, so they don't want to be necessarily routing more traffic through there, as well as the bridge crossing the river is already a pinch point. So it didn't make a lot of sense from a future network connection perspective. As well as discussions that we had with Parks Canada. Obviously, they had certain reservations about a structure in the vicinity of the historic lift lock. So it's not being recommended to be carried forward based on the work that we've done to date.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jean. Jean, while we have you on here, there's a couple more questions in the chat that were directed towards you, I believe. The first one is, have there been any approaches made to the county regarding the proposed Parkhill Television Road realignments? It isn't mentioned, and they mentioned that it would be responsible to propose this and hope that it happens later. And they noted that this could be an issue for the west end of the city. They also noted that if the county declines to participate, is there a fallback position? And could it be considered to realign Television Road to meet University by swinging east and constructing across the ridge north of Parkhill?
Well, thanks for the question, Ashley. So a couple of things. One is that our recommendation is to realign Parkhill and Television to connect into County Road 4. So it has been recommended as part of the solution. The county has identified in its it has a transportation master plan dating back to 2014, and in that plan it identifies the concept of this realignment. We're actually working with the county right now on their transportation master plan update, and that project is being carried forward as part of the county's transportation master plan. So they are contemplating it. Obviously, when it comes time to implementation, there would definitely be more conversation between the city and the county, as well as the township, given the fact that you're talking about a realignment of a road within the county's jurisdiction. So there would be more dialogue going forward, but it is a contemplated improvement in the county's transportation plans.
Perfect, thank you. There's another question for you as well. I was expecting the Maria Street extension to Television Road to be a priority. Wondering what the long range lookout for lift lock golf courses going forward. I'm not sure if you would have an answer for that.
I can certainly start an answer, and I may need to rely on a member of city staff to follow up. But at this point in time, we aren't recommending Maria Street as an immediate priority because there are alternative routes to connect between Ashburnum and Television Road. There is also the Ashborough Village subdivision, which I mentioned briefly as one of the drivers of the East Side study. And it contemplates a new road connection going from Ashburnum over to Television Road as well. So there's no immediate impetus to need the Maria Street extension from Ashburnum over to Television Road at this time. However, in the future, should the Sherbrooke to Maria connection materialize, then the extension over to Television Road makes much more sense at that point in time. But from a traffic capacity perspective, there's sufficient routing, and there isn't the demand apparent from the modeling that we've done to show that you need to put in another road connection between Ashburnham and Television at this time.
Kevin, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to try and touch on the lift lock golf course question. So, I mean, those are lands that are sort of under the ownership of the group developing the Ashborough subdivision. I think the golf course is going to be reconfigured in their ultimate plans. It won't be quite as, I don't think it will be the full 18 holes, but some of it will be maintained because some of that area is in development areas that really can't be developed through, floodplains and things like that. So there will be some facility there. I think that will evolve over time as they finalize some of their plans for how the rest of that development would be seen to transpire.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Kirk, I see your hand is up, and you also have a few questions in the chat, so you can feel free to ask those now as well. You should be able to unmute, I believe.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
No worries.
In your very good presentation, I didn't see any mention of any improvements for disabilities. I know that transit and their department always try, and traffic always have a good outlook for disabilities, but I just don't want them to be forgotten. And I would think that Mark at the city would be very disappointed if that wasn't addressed. And I know in the engineering department, they always try and include everything to the latest specifications and stuff like that. But I just don't want that to be forgotten. My second point would be I think education for new things is key. There was a roundabout on Parkhill Road, no education whatsoever for it, not only for the users, but the public of Peterborough. And I think that's part of the key, is to get people to buy into why that infrastructure has been created. The same with the cycling box that's at one of the intersections. I've traveled that roadway many a times and never seen anybody out there. And I think it's because they're afraid to go out there and make themselves vulnerable. I think it's a good progressive stance, and those types of things are welcome. But I think the users have to be made aware and know why their dollars are being spent on those things and why. And obviously the buy-in of council has to be there. But when these jobs are put out, I think it's vital that part of the contract be education to the traveling public. And when I say traveling public, that's everybody that uses the corridor, not only vehicular, bicycle, walking, everyone, including even the kids that ride the school bus. Like, I think that's one of the things that's very important to any new stuff that comes along. Thanks. That's about it. Thank you.
Kevin, I see your hand is up, but you can go ahead if you'd like.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch briefly on accessibility, because Kirk raises a good point. I mean, it's very important that we address accessibility in all of our programs, and the fact that it wasn't really highlighted in here doesn't mean it's being ignored, because it is a requirement. I mean, legally, we have to comply with accessibility legislation every time we do a project. It gets a lot of focus at the city in terms of making our new construction projects, as accessible as we can, putting in, accessible intersection controls at intersections. We put in, drop curbs and tactile plates at all of our crossings to enhance, and we use enhanced crosswalks at a lot of our intersections now. And those are all, examples of where we build accessibility in right from the get-go. It's not an option. So, our apologies for not calling it out in the presentation, but it is something that we do as a matter of course. I guess the last thing on education, I mean, that is an important factor as we move forward with anything new. And it's one of the toughest things we do, or we're trying to do, because everyone's got busy lives. Everyone's got, 100,000 different things competing for their attention. And, the city coming out and trying to promote something new is probably the last thing people pay attention to. The fact that we're talking about a 30-year plan to transform transportation in the city, and we have 24 people here today, it's just an example of how it's hard to reach out and grab people's attention. So it's certainly a good point. We try to do, some education when we can. We try to do press releases for new initiatives that are coming out. There's always room for improvement, but it's a very competitive landscape out there competing for people's attention, and we look for new tools all the time.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. Question for Jean. This is from Councillor Parnell. The question is, are you acknowledging that we have a very important park at Rogers Cove on Maria, which includes an accessible playground, very popular splash pad, a beach trail, and a boat launch?
Thank you for the question. So as part of the work, we've taken into consideration all of the sort of the abutting land uses and all of the abutting services. And as I mentioned, the concept of there being some further expansion or extension of Maria would be a much longer proposition. And if it was to go ahead, then all of these factors would be taken into consideration as part of the review. So, so we had regard for it, but I think at this point in time, we're looking more from a much broader network perspective, and would have a more detailed look at the very specific items with future study.
Councillor, does that answer your question? I think you might be perfect.
Sorry, I literally just stepped away for a moment and I missed the last part of that answer. I apologize.
No problem, Councillor. So what I was mentioning is that we are aware of sort of all of the adjacent land uses and services that are sort of in the corridor. At this point in time, what we're suggesting is that this is a potential longer-term future connection that would be subject to much more in-depth study, simply because it does have some potentially far-reaching impacts. So all of these things would be taken into consideration. What we're doing at this point, though, is just laying out the prospect that a future connection could be required at some point, and sort of the city suggesting the city take action at this point in time, just to bring it onto the radar in terms of corridor protection, and have that in the backs of their mind as you move forward with any future initiatives in the corridor.
Thank you very much. And sometimes I do ask these questions basically knowing the answer, but it needs to be asked because I know I'm going to be asked, and other people need to have the official answer. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Braden. As your hand is up, you should be able to unmute yourself now, Braden.
Great, thank you. I wanted to build off of that comment about the Ashburnum Drive realignment and the development of the lift block lands. Given the flooding that occurs on the east side of Ashburnum Drive Road, would the future realignment contemplate increasing the elevation of Ashburnum Drive as well? And would that therefore not possibly affect the floodplain extent?
Gene, you can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Certainly, thank you for the question. So at this point in time, we've identified that there is a benefit to relocating Ashburnum Drive, or potentially to the east, away from the Trent Severn waterway, for largely because of concerns about the flood lines and floodplain, but also from a transportation network perspective, providing some further separation from some of the intersections and connections. So there's a number of compelling reasons to consider it further. However, those details, like what exactly the elevation may be like, or this exact location, will be coming through the next phases of the study. So one of our recommendations is that we've identified that that changes to Ashburnum north of Mariah, would be beneficial. And that we carry forward with the remainder of the Class EA process, which involves getting into more details about the design. So my long-winded answer to your question is that we haven't looked at the specific details yet, and that's the next part of our study.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Gene.
Thanks for the question. We have one question remaining. If anyone else has any additional questions, feel free to raise your hand whenever you're ready, or put the question into the chat box. The question is, sorry, bit of a technical issue here. Okay, the question is, will there be a recommendation that the city require new subdivisions use outside in road planning and promote more mixed-use development so people can work, live, and play within their communities, reducing travel distances? Perhaps we can go to Kevin and Brett on that to start.
Yeah, maybe I'll try and handle that. In some extent, yes. I mean, as we're looking at new developments and new subdivisions, we're starting to, look at some of the key roads in those development areas and prioritize things like adding bike lanes to them, making sure they have, sidewalks and even transit infrastructure built into the design of the subdivision. So we're starting to do that in some of our newer subdivisions, but some of those things do take time as well. For example, you have a subdivision that might build out over 10 years. We may not put transit in there right away because there's no one to pick up in the buses. And until we assume the roads, there's a lot of disruptions on the roads with, developers. They'll put piles of bricks on the roads and stuff as they're building homes. And that just doesn't really work well with things like providing reliable transit service into the subdivision. So some of the infrastructure that we're talking about in the subdivisions will take time to evolve just as the subdivisions build out and they evolve. Our new official plan talks about, promoting mixed use development and particularly in corridors. It's sometimes harder in subdivisions because, the Peterborough market really isn't sized well to have, a lot of neighborhood facilities in subdivisions. They can't compete with, something that's 10 minutes down the road, say along the Lansdowne Street corridor. And you'll see in a lot of the subdivisions where there is zoned commercial, it's either the last thing to be built, or sometimes it's not even built, and they can't market it. So, those are good objectives, and we try to do that through our planning process. But sometimes, as the market reality dictates, they don't come about the same way. But we certainly do have a number of different nodes in the city for commercial activities that we do promote through the official plan to try and shorten those trip distances for people, so they can choose alternate modes of travel.
Perfect. Jean, we have a question. It's in the chat. My chat window is frozen right now, but I can see that it starts with Maria Street there. Would you be able to have a look at that and provide an answer if possible?
Yeah, certainly. So, so a question from Kirk with regards to the Maria Street extension and the fact that it can currently be constructed without any impacts because there's nothing, the corridor is protected, the land is in city ownership, and there's nothing on it. But a couple of the other locations, specifically Manise and McFarland, have some restrictions. And we certainly are aware of that. We took that into consideration. It just, when the traffic forecasting was done, when we put it in the network and took it out of the network, it didn't make much change in terms of how traffic flowed in the area. So, and that's in the absence of a connection further to the west. So it was felt that, once that new road gets constructed through Ashburnum Village, over connecting Television Road to Ashburnum, that it will meet the future traffic needs of the area. But the corridor is still there, and should, that's one of the reasons why you review these sorts of plans on say a 5-year increment or whatever, is that you can come back and have a look in the future as to whether conditions change. Unfortunately, the city has the corridor protected, so then there's no expectation of releasing the corridor because it's being used for active travel use. So at this point in time, there's not a lot of risk in terms of if that doesn't happen. So.
All right, thank you. There's also a follow-up to that, I believe. The question is, a new road through Ashburnum is arterial, and then question mark.
It is not going to be designated as an arterial through Ashburnum. It's a collector road status, and then that will be that between all of the connections that sort of run between Ashburnum and Television Road, they meet all of the future traffic needs in the area.
Brett, we have another question here. Kevin touched on it briefly in the chat, but I think we can elaborate on it a little bit more. There's a request to answer it a little further. It's in regards to slide 26 in the TMP presentation, if you could share that.
Just one moment.
Sure. Yeah, perfect. The question is, there's been a mention of rebuilding Parkhill both east and west, but no mention of a very needy high-level crossing over the canal. This is a major arterial thoroughfare that should be fully utilized. But again, to fully utilize existing arterial thoroughfare on a goods movement corridor that is constrained by daily roads closing due to boat traffic, a high-level crossing makes this a more feasible and utilized corridor. So this.
And yeah, I don't know if Jean has some comment on that from the East Side study.
Yeah, I think it was partially related to goods movement, which is why it was brought up on this slide, but Jean, you might have some input on that as well.
Yeah, sure. So one of the recommendations coming from the East Side study is to look at expansion of Parkhill Road from Armour, a little bit east of Armour Road, over across the river, because one of the issues that has been identified through the traffic forecasting for the TMP is the need for additional crossing capacity of the river. And, that's in part for vehicles, but it's also in part for things like goods movement, active travel, transit. So there needs to be the city's looking at it sort of in its totality from a transportation network perspective. So the idea of that you need to accommodate additional travel across Parkhill really stems from the fact that it's going to be a pretty important corridor going forward. And based on the traffic modeling that's been done, it showed that it's the one that that it's going to be most used in the future, and it provides the best connections and cross-city connectivity than any of the other connections would. The only one that sort of rivals it is Lansdowne, but it's far enough away that it's not convenient for people or wouldn't properly serve future traffic demands. The ones that are sort of between Lansdowne and Parkhill, they obviously provide some benefit to the East Side study area, but from a much broader city perspective, Parkhill is of greater value from that perspective. So it's we do appreciate that none of these are easy. To be perfectly frank, none of these projects are easy. But when you're looking 30 years out in the future, you do have to make sure that you are protecting corridors and leaving things in place so that at some point in the future, should when these things materialize, that the opportunity hasn't been precluded.
Perfect. Thank you. We don't have any questions remaining in the chat box, and there's no other hands remaining. So Brett, I think we can go back to you at this point.
All right. Well, both the East Side study and the Transportation Master Plan, and for that matter, the Cycling Master Plan, do have presences on your Connect PTBO website. So you can find out more information on all three of the studies there. I had mentioned that we're doing a similar session tonight. So if you want to tell people that if they'd like, they can come and hear that live. These sessions are being recorded and they will be made available on the Connect PTBO website so that someone can go and hear the presentation for themselves if they weren't able to. They can also listen to the question and answer period as well. We really appreciate your comments. We would prefer to have them by February 11th, so we have enough time to incorporate them before we go to your council in March. And we really appreciate people taking the time. Jeremiah, I think.
Yeah, you covered everything. Like Brett mentioned, we really appreciate everyone attending today. Your input is extremely valuable. It's going to help us very much in the decision-making process. I'd like to add as well that there is a survey available on the project website. So if you have a moment free at any time, feel free to go ahead and do that survey at your own leisure. It will be opened until the 11th as well. And that's everything I had on my end. And Jean, anything to add on your end for the East Side study at all?
No, I think you've covered it off quite nicely, Jeremiah.
Okay, perfect. I think that concludes the meeting then. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank
Thank you for attending.
Please do the
Thanks,
survey
everyone.
and get all of your friends to do the survey. We need cross participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.